.NET options pattern achieve two design goals. Number one, encapsulation by using the interface segregation principle. Number two, separation of concerns. Now let's see that in practice. In the previous video, I have shown you a very simple implementation of assessing configuration settings inside your C# code. Here we have implemented a simple extension method, create an object of the configuration, which is this configuration, and then get the required section and bind it, and then add as a singleton. And then we are using it in the hosted service by injecting that particular service. Well, this particular do-it-yourself style is sufficient for simple configurations, but say that you have another section which you want to bind, then you will have to do that all over again and add another service. What if the .NET already provides you a convention to use or to configure your app settings and assess them using open generics or a generic pattern? That is what option pattern entails. Now let's refactor this code into options pattern. The first way, there are multiple ways. In .NET, let me show you. You can come in here and say configure. So you see there are multiple configure methods. We are going to use the first one, configure, and I can simply say PDF create. And in here, I am going to say configuration get required section, name of PDF, and boom. Now we have essentially achieved the same thing what we are doing by adding the services ourselves and injecting it. Only thing is missing is this binder configuration. Throw an exception when the configuration mismatch happens. Say that you have one configuration value in here, but that does not exist on your object. It will throw an exception. We can have that as well. We can say binder options in here and options dot throw on. Now we are essentially doing the same thing what we did in the extension method, but we don't need this extension method anymore. But how this will be used in the hosted service? Now we can no longer inject PDF creation workers config. Instead, we will have to use the options pattern. The first service, it provides IOptions. Let's take a look at that and copy that. Now we have injected a IOptions, which is a singleton service. It is added to the dependency container by the, instead of saying, we will say dot value now. Now we can assess this configuration. Now let's take a look what's under the hood. What it does is it calls this method, and then it goes in here, as you can see, it calling the AddOptions. Just adding multiple services here. One is IOptions, second one is IOptionsSnapshot, which is scoped, and third one is the IOptionsMontior. This is singleton as well. Options factory, this is used by the internal implementations of the options container, and this is IOptionsMontior cache, which is used by the IOptionsMontior. Now what is the difference among all these services? You will learn that shortly, but first let me show you that this particular configuration is actually accessible when we are injecting it into the hosted service, which is right here. So I can come in here, let me put a breakpoint in here and show you quickly the value we are still getting. Well, we got the value, meaning it is actually getting binded and getting injected correctly. Now, since this is singleton, now if you go in here and change the value for whatever reason, let's say 1001, what will happen on the next pass of the worker service? Let me actually move the cursor to this skip to here, and you will see the value will still remain 1000. Let me try another pass so the change detection can happen. The value will still remain the same. Now, if you want to detect changes, you will have to use different services. That is where IOptionsMontior and IOptionsSnapshot comes into the picture. Well, if you want to get the latest value as soon as you change the configuration, all you have to do is change this IOptions to IOptionsMontior, which is singleton as well, and in here changes singleton as well. So the difference between the IOptions versus IOptionsMontior is that they both are singleton, but IOptionsMontior also track any changes to the app settings. So it is watching that file. It has a settings of, I think, 250 milliseconds. I hopefully will find the poll time. Poll time. Hopefully. Well. I don't see it. It's 250 milliseconds. That's what I believe. Now let's go and fix this error. Instead of saying value, now we will have to say current value. So it will give me the latest value with the configured polling. Let's run it and see it in action. Now the value is 1001 seconds, and I'm gonna go in here and make it 1000, right? And save it and come back to the worker here and run it again. It's gonna wait 1 second. It's gonna wait actually. So let me make this site again to 1. So we'll quickly get to that. These things happen when you trying to record the whole video in one shot. 1 second, okay. 1 second, and let me change it to 2 and save it. Go back to the worker. What is it? 2 seconds. So you got the value. Now you must be asking yourself that what's special this particular IOptionsSnapshot does. Well, it is scoped, meaning that when you create a scope of the container, its value only gonna change after that scope dies. So let's see that in action. Now, as soon as I change in here, so there is some problem with the rider failing to edit the file. That's okay. Let's change this to IOptionsSnapshot. We're gonna get to the validation soon, don't worry. Instead of saying current value, now what we are saying is the value. Now when I try to run this thing, it will error out because you cannot inject scope services inside a singleton service, because that will make them singleton, and that will be a wrong use case, and it can lead to severe memory leaks and can kill your whole application. Well, if you can't use that, then how do I use that? So this is a worker service. So we can't actually do that anymore. And if we want to use the IOptionsSnapshot, remove that. So if you see in here, we are using the scope. So if I use that scope in here, then the value is only gonna change within this scope. Let me show you. So it is doing it. IOptionsSnapshot. So we got the service provider, and let me change the naming rule. Good. Now the scope is created here. We resolve the service and we're using it within the while loop. Now let's go ahead and run it. So the delay second duration is 2 seconds. Let me go ahead and actually make it 3. Now what will happen is that you will not see that value change. The reason is because you are creating the scope outside the while loop, and if you want new value, you will have to resolve that service with the after creating the new scope. The possible fix to that is that we can actually copy that and bring it closer to where it is used, and copy that thing. And call it internal scope, and here you can say okay. Now you will see the value change. Let's see that in the action. It's 3, and I'm gonna change the value to 4. Notice that we didn't have to restart the application at all. So wow, it's changed, right? Cool. So this is creating a new scope. As you can see that this has additional cost to it. For example, if you are in ASP.NET Core API project or in Blazor, where the middleware is scoped, then you would want that value to not change if you are relying on that value in different components to do the process. For example, here we are creating the PDFs. If we supply a value of a footer node to include it on each page on the PDF footer. And we are using IOptionsMontior, which picks up the value as soon as it is available, and you are creating a PDF each page, and it takes a long time and it has a lot of pages. Then some pages might get a new value and some pages will have the old values. So you don't want that to happen. In that case, you would use the scoped version. Once it's resolved, it will have the same value until this scope gets disposed of. Okay, now we covered the IOptions, which is singleton, and it does not track any value changes. IOptionsMontior, it track value changes. It is also singleton. IOptionsSnapshot, it is scoped and it does track changes value, but it has a cost associated with it. So be sure to test it as per your use case. I will show you a benchmark I conducted, which does not show a large difference, but if you have a lot of config values in here, like hierarchical config values, and they are large in size, like a lot of values, since option pattern bind it for you using reflection, the more values it have, the more allocations it will do and the more cost it will incur in your application. Now let's go back in here. So we are using this kind. How do I validate now, right? That's a fair question. Well, this does not provide any built-in way to validate it, but what we can do is that we can actually come into the configuration in here and say public class PDF. There are two ways. This is the first way. So we can create a config validator right here and then say option, validate options, and provide the PDF options in here. It will implement interface in here. You can say if the options deletion is greater than 10, then return validation fail, and otherwise return validation dot success. So but the problem with that is you will have to remember to actually register this particular validator. I validate options like that, PDF, and provide the implementation like that. Now the .NET itself will pick it up and kick that validation. Now let's try to make it 15, and we will see that as soon as that service is resolved inside the worker, which is in here. So we got that as soon as the service is resolved, and we try to assess the value because this is a lazily evaluated property. Service resolve does not actually tries to resolve the values itself. Now it found out, okay, while binding it, that the value is greater than 10 and throws an exception. But you see the problem in here, that the validation is only happening when the value is getting resolved, which can be deep inside your components, which is not a good way. We would want to fail early and quickly so we can fix the problem. So in other words, we would like to fail when the host is actually starting. Is there a way? Well, there is no built-in way, but what we can do in here is that we can say host.services and get required service IOption PDF. So and dot value dot declaration and say discard it. Now if I run it, what will happen is that after building the host with all the required services, it will resolve this service and assess the value. As we know, when we assess the value, all the magic using reflection and binding it and running all the validators which are registered with this particular type will be done by the .NET, and it will kick the validations. And you will see that it is actually failing when we are trying to assess the value of this particular thing. So it is failing on start, which is still nice. Well, that is cool, but we are doing this hack. Is there a better way, or is there a built-in way, or is there a settled convention among .NET ecosystem which is understood by all the developers when this kind of situation arises, that we would like to configure our configuration section values so we can follow the ISP principle to inject only things a component needs rather than the whole God object of configuration, and maintain the separation of concerns. Well, we can do that, but we cannot use this particular configure method. What we will have to do is we will have to use add options, and here I can say like that, and in here I will have to specify the configuration get required section. The reason I'm using the required section is it will error out if that particular section is misspelled or does not exist inside the app settings.json. Now we want that. Now what else we have in here? Very cool methods, right? So we have the validate on start, we can say that, and we have the validate at annotations. Well, let's get over the validate on start. We already have the validator in here, and we have removed the resolving of the IOption, so it will kick the validation. Now this method is actually doing internally all that. Let me remove that. Now we already, so the validator, the validation option service we registered will still work, although there is a builder pattern does provide us a way to give the validation options inline rather than going the long route, which is creating a specific class, which is a more code. While what we can do it validate on start, and we can actually validate our values right in here, and it has a bunch of overloads. The overload is that it provides you the field object with the configuration setting value from the app settings of the other sources, and you can actually come in here and say return false. So what we are saying is that if the configuration is return false, and here I am returning true, now what I can do in here is I can remove this particular stuff and come back to, if I remove it, it no longer exists, right? So if I run it validate on start, now again my validations will happen on the start of the application without me actually, as you can see, the validation failure has occurred, and you can actually specify. There is another overload, which, for example, if you get the values PDF config and you need particular service, for example, I validate options PDF validator like that. So you can inject those services. Let me put back the service back in again. Although it is kicked in, but I'm just showing you how you can inject services, which in case you need it. Services dot add singleton I validate options PDF PDF validator in here. Okay, what's wrong? Cool, right? Now I can say that return validator.validate, which is the so string.empty, it demands, okay, fine, and I have the config object in here. So if it succeeded, true, otherwise false. And if I run this thing, let me put a breakpoint so you can see how it is getting kicked in. Debugger is taking a bit of time on Mac with Rider. I have no, let me restart that actually. Come on. So I don't know how this got added. So this is a when you do add options, as you can see, it provides you options builder, which supports the fluent syntax like ... Let me restart the writer. There is no way that this will keep happening. Let me go to program file in here and see when this, okay, let's debug it. I guess it might be causing this circular dependencies. So let's just add this particular thing in here, add as a singleton, and inject it. We're gonna just return true and put a breakpoint. All I was trying to show you that how this particular thing actually inject. You can see that this is a new instance with the value 0. So if you need a specific validator to get injected, which does not implement I-validated options, otherwise you will end up with these circular references and your application won't even start. Cool, right? So you can do inline validations like I am doing, and similarly validate data annotations. Okay, what does this do? In order to use that in a hosted service, what you gotta do is you gotta install this particular package. It provides a good set of attribute classes which you can use on your configuration object and tell it what do you actually want. For example, I can say that this particular thing is required and it has a range between type of int 1 to 10, so it will validate accordingly. And you can actually validate the enumerated objects as well, the complex objects. This is an array which you can implement using the inline validate options, or you can actually implement the I-validate options as well. Now that I have specified that, here we are returning true. It's 0 to 15, and let's say if it kicks in. So it is returning true, cool, but as you can see, it provides a nice message without you actually specifying the detailed message, and it is failing on the start. Let's go back in here. Now we have specified the validate on start, we've specified the validate, and we specified the validate data annotations as well. Now, if you notice that this approach is contrasting the approach we have employed in here, which implements a particular validator for an option, and it supplies you with value. You can have your own rule. If you have really long list and really complex one, I think this is the right approach to use. So you can unit test it accordingly. But if you have relatively simple, like I do in here, that I only have delay duration, this is more appropriate to use, because this particular approach also requires for us to register that service, so it can be called. And then for this data annotations, you can use regex as well, and it has a good set of data annotations to support range values, int values, string values, and you can specify it to actually validate the complex hierarchical objects. I will show you in the later part of the video, where we will validate a complex object which does have an enumeration inside it rather than just simply plain string. What else this AddOptions options builder provide us? Well, it has configure and post configure methods. So you can actually configure, specify configure, which will be called within the chain once the value, which will be called as the first method after you bind it. If you call it after bind, if you call it before bind, it will be called with the empty object. And then you have a post configure object, which is very handy because as I showed you that you can inject services right top in here. So I'm gonna copy this in here so it won't complain extra. Okay, and in the post configure, suppose this particular validator or service, you would like to call an external service, or you would like to fetch something from the database and set some additional values on this configuration object, you can do that. For example, if I introduce a property in here, string footer node get set, right? And let me change back to the value range for now. If I come in here in the post configure method, I can actually, relying on this particular thing, which is say external surface or database value, I can actually set the config.footer node, get it from the DB. So if you have a similar use case, you can actually use the post configure method as well. As you can see that this is null right now. So the validate true, cool. Now we are as soon as every as you can see in the create worker, the last we use is the scope service IOptionsSnapshot. So every time it is getting resolved, it will call the validate method and it will call the post configure method as well. So the method goes like it binds it, and then it calls the configure, and then it will call all the validations. Let's go and try to actually look at the unnamed. Let's try to find it. Okay, so here is the order. It creates an instance of the options, and then it calls all the configure methods. As you can see, there are named configurations and unnamed ones, which is the default name, which is empty. We are only using the unnamed one, are the default ones. The name configurations has their limited use case. We will explore that in another video. Then it will call the post configure, and in here it is getting any validators added to the services or which are added as an inline, and it is calling those and throwing an exception if there are any failures. Let's try to run it. It's calling. Now for the next time, it should call which method based on, as you can see, this is calling the post configure first, and then it goes to the validate method. Same goes with the other validators as well. So say that if you change a value and make it set, it will throw an exception. So you would have to have some guards outside the application as well. So you won't set arbitrary values on change, especially because then you will have to handle the exceptions right in here, and your application will start malfunctioning. Anyways, you will get some error logs as well. Well, that has been a lot that we have covered. This is a default convention, and this is well understood by .NET developers, and it works and scales well. You can even use fluent validation as well. What else? Well, thank you very much. We will cover the complex hierarchical validations where an object is an array, and inside the array each item has multiple properties, and we would like to validate those as well. And I will show you how you can enable ahead of time compilation to fix one edge case in the next video. For now, please do subscribe to my channel, and thank you very much.